Welcome to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I am Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. Hi there. In 1865, Union General William T. Sherman and Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton had a discussion with leaders of the Black community in Savannah, Georgia. Now, during that meeting, the idea of former slaves receiving 40 acres of land as reparations was formed. But former slaves never received their 40 acres or that mule that they talk about. And no form of reparations have ever been given to former slaves or their descendants. If the 157-year-old promise of reparations were finally to be fulfilled in America, would that close the racial wealth gap? Well, let's get down to business. I don't know if a mule can close the wealth gap today, but this is the business of being Black. And today it's all about reparations. Please welcome the co-founder of Ed Anime Productions and professor of engineering at Morgan State University, Dr. Ma'at. Hi, Dr. Ma'at.
Hello, Tammi. How are you?
Blessed. Louisville councilman and professor at Simmons College of Kentucky, Ja'Cory Arthur is with us. Hi, Ja'Cory.
Peace. Glad to be here.
Glad you are here. The host of Real Talk with ZSJ, Zakia Sankara Jabbar, is with us today. Hi, Zakia.
Greetings. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And the host of Uncle Tom Talks podcast, Derek Wilborn, is here to bring the pain. Hi, Derek.
Tammi, it is always a pleasure.
So let's start off with that infamous question I always ask, which is, why should Black people care if reparations were given? Let's start with you, Ja'Cory.
Well, it's really simple. When you unpack the reality of the wealth in this country, overwhelmingly, Black Americans disproportionately do not have any wealth. In fact, we have less than 5% of the wealth. We've never had more than that threshold. And when you unpack that 5% even more, about a third of it is in pensions. Almost half of it is in credit liabilities. That's not wealth at all. That's unstable. And it's been predicted by the year 2053, our wealth will go from that minuscule 5% down to 0%. So if we don't have reparations, we might not exist in a country that our ancestors built and were never paid for building.
Derek?
The topic of reparations, I think there's macro and micro concerns, both of which we'll talk about today. I want to start with the macro. In the macro, in the big picture, I think the topic is largely moot because I don't think it's ever going to happen. Nobody in Washington, D.C., especially the Democrats, has the political chops to vote for and implement a reparations law. It'll never happen. But beyond that, the other issue that has to be addressed is the devil that's in the details here. The fundamental question of reparations cannot be answered, and that is simply this: who pays who, how much? There's a lot of reasons that question really can't be answered. As we progress, we'll probably get to most of them, but nobody can truly answer that question.
So why then should Black people care? Derek?
Why should we care? Why should we care about whether or not it gets paid?
Yes.
Well, because we don't know. So your question was, would reparations close the wealth gap? Of course.
No, my question was, why should Black people care about reparations?
Well, you have to ask every Black person that. I personally don't care.
You're not Black,
I don't want
Derek.
reparations because I live in a country.
Derek, you're not Black.
What?
You're not Black.
You know, that's something that the current president of the United States said, and it's an insult to every Black person who doesn't necessarily hold liberal views. My race is determined by my ethnic heritage, not by how I think. And we
that's what I'm asking, Derek. You just said you'd have to ask every Black person. And
I see what your point is.
Right. And so I just thought I assumed, which I am wrong for assuming, that you were Black and that I was asking a Black person. So that's why I asked, are you Black?
Okay, I misinterpreted your question. I apologize for my harsh response, which you didn't have coming.
It's all good.
My personal answer is I don't care. I don't want the government giving me anything. I want to earn everything that I have, just as I always have. The government doesn't owe me. America doesn't owe me. If anything, I owe America. I live in the greatest country in the world. And I am glad to live in the greatest country in the world, and I don't apologize for it.
It is indeed the greatest country in the world. I'll have to ditto you on that. But Dr. Ma'at, you seem a little
I was a little.
But before you go there, let me remind you of the question: why should Black people care about reparations?
All right. So I did when he said that I need to earn it. Derek, we've already earned it, Derek. We earned it when we gave the United States, there was 250 years of chattel slavery, followed by Jim Crow semi-slavery, followed by policies and practices that were created and implemented that strategically put Black people at the bottom of the racial hierarchy. So what do you mean we need to earn it? We've already earned it. We've paid with blood.
That's
we
not
paid
we.
with our lives. We paid with our lives.
That's not we.
We paid with blood. We paid with labor. Now, let me answer her question.
That's not we.
So, excuse me, Tammy, let me answer.
We will come back to that because Derek has a good point. Go ahead.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Our ancestors have already paid. We've already earned it. And so why should Black people care about reparations? Well, Black people have never been made whole in this country. We've never been made whole. Literally, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, well, hell, some of us didn't even know we were free until 1865, hence Juneteenth. But when we were let go from chattel slavery, we walked into another type of slavery, right? Where whites set up a system to continue to extract or exploit Black labor, okay? And then that was within that system, we could not buy land. They passed vagrancy laws, work contracts, convict leasing, labor camps, sharecropping. At one point, Black people, we had a bank called Freedmen's Bank, which was actually set up by the federal government. And it was a bank, the federal government promised us that they would give us this bank and we would be able to get land. And then it closed and took $3 million from Black people. We had the failure of numerous Black businesses and Black banks because we didn't get the same support as white businesses and white banks. There were massacres that occurred in this country that wiped out Black lives, Black property, and Black businesses. Just study Tulsa, Oklahoma, study Wilmington, North Carolina. Study
so Dr. Ma'at, I'm going to assume that is why Black people should care about reparations.
That's why. That's why.
I wish I had
not only
that,
but
Zakia, I gotta grab Zakia's answer. Why should Black people care about reparations, Zakia?
We should care about reparations for all the answers you just heard from both Ja'Cory and Dr. Ma'at. Not only that, America had the wherewithal to pay reparations to other groups of people that they committed heinous crimes against, including the Japanese and others. So what is the problem with reparations for African descendant people in this country, particularly because we built the country? It was our labor that built the economic engine of what you all call the greatest country in the world. This country would not be, quote unquote, the greatest country in the world without Africans who built the economy of this country. Period.
That's right.
So I want to ask, Derek made a good point. Dr. Ma'at, you said we built America. We did this. We did that. Derek said we didn't do anything. And he has a point.
He doesn't have a point, Tammy.
You, Dr. Ma'at, hold that thought. You, Dr. Ma'at, you, Ja'Cory, you, Zakiya, me, Tammi Mack, did not build a thing in America. Why do we deserve funds for nothing?
Okay, let me answer that.
Let's give it to Zakiya. Go ahead.
Zakiya. No, you were right first time.
Thank you.
No, listen. if Europeans and white people can continue to pass down the wealth that was accumulated at that time, then we certainly can talk about what descendants of Africans deserve in this country, because no one has taken the wealth away from the Europeans that created the wealth during that time in history. That's called old money in this country, and it certainly still exists. We can't separate that. We can't.
Derek, how do you feel about that? We can't separate the fact that white people continue to create generational wealth from those very people who built this country that were not us.
Come on.
I wish I had a nickel for every time this conversation turns to yesterday. We did all these things in 1863, 65, 1902, 1952, and that's all true. But we don't live in 1867. We live in 2022. And we also live in a country where Black Americans can get federal assistance to pay our rent, to help us buy food. We can go to college for free. The idea that there's been nothing in the way of reparations is not entirely true. We've fought a $2 trillion war on poverty that also did benefit Black Americans. But at some point, we have to stop living in the rearview mirror. When people say we built America, I was born in Chicago, Illinois. City currently has more than 24 skyscrapers over 40 stories tall. We didn't build that. We have an interstate highway system that connects all the cities in this country. We didn't build that. Your producer right now is in Los Angeles, California. We didn't build Los Angeles. So it's rhetoric.
What do you mean? How do you know that there
can't simply say we built America.
Jacory, I want you to weigh in on this.
Well, I think it's important to realize as we talk about earning something, none of the people who enslaved us earned our labor. And they definitely did not pay for it, which is the conversation we're having right now. You also have to realize when you say we did not build it, we today are the descendants. We are the heirs of those people who did build it, and we never got our due. All of the reparations programs over the course of the country and our history in this country who have been paid to Native Americans, Japanese Americans, even Jewish Americans in 2015 from this country, that money was given to heirs or given to descendants, even if the people who suffered the atrocity did not receive those direct payments. So the precedent has already been set, but for some reason we tiptoe and dance around the fact that we are owed a payment that we have never received. And until we receive that payment, we'll continue to get some of those services.
Let's take a quick break and come right back on Business of Being Black. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. Today, the business of being Black is reparations. Derek, earlier you said it's never going to happen, but that factually is not true. California is now discussing reparations in a serious way with a task force, and other cities and states have also begun the process of reparations. So it actually, at some point in our lifetime, will happen a step at a time. Do you agree with that, Jacory?
Absolutely, but I disagree with the notion that cities and states can pay the debt that is owed. Earlier, a question was raised around how much that debt is. When you calculate the amount of enslaved people from 1776, when the United States gained its independence, all the way up through the Civil War, we're talking about a debt when multiplied by the compound interest rate is roughly $20.9 trillion that should be paid over time, because this is a multi-generational issue that we absolutely have to pay. Otherwise, we will not have wealth in a country that we have built. But the federal government is the only institution that can close that racial wealth gap, which is really a lineage wealth gap, because we're talking about descendants of slavery. All the city and state budgets combined is less than $5 trillion, which is really nothing compared to that larger debt when we talk about that phase or that era of slavery. So I definitely agree that we will have this in our lifetime, but it's only as much as we fight for it. Just like we fought to abolish slavery, we fought to abolish segregation. It's going to take masses of Black people and our allies to fight to gain economic emancipation, which we've yet to have. But that fight was started in the 60s with the Civil Rights era.
Dr. Ma'at?
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with him more that it would have to be done on a federal level. Like, look, Tammi, when you study history and see Derek keeps saying, oh, we're looking at the past. So it seems like he doesn't understand that the past shapes the present, right? So everything that we are experiencing now is a direct result of what happened in the past. So yes, we do have to revisit the past in order to assess what's happening in the present. And so as Jacory just stated, it would have to be done on a federal level. I mean, think about, you got to read this book. And I know whenever I come on, I'm always showing books. And Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson, there's a diagram or a table in there where he shows how the federal government created wealth for whites over a period of 300 years from 1675 all the way to 1975, it created white wealth. This book right here, The Color of Money by Baron Darren, she talks about the policies and practices that were created and implemented to create white wealth. All right. And, particularly if we want to revisit the New Deal policies that were created under the presidency of Roosevelt Franklin D. Roosevelt. And so these were federal government. It was the federal government that created white wealth. It's the federal government that created white suburbs in Black ghettos. So it's going to take the federal government to get us out of the rut that we're in.
Zakia, you agree with that?
100%. I appreciate the local efforts in Illinois and other places that are having these conversations, but we cannot let the federal government off the hook. And the reason why I lift up the local governments is because they also have their own history of anti-Blackness. Particularly here in Maryland, where I live, there has also been a reparations bill considered at the state level as well. So I support 100% the federal reparations, because I believe, as has been eloquently said by both Jakari and Dr. Mayat, for all of those reasons. But secondly, I wouldn't discount either the efforts that are going on in local states and cities, because they had their own anti-Black policies and practices that also need to be made whole.
But also, I think it sets a precedence. So if it does happen in a city, if it does happen in a state, which it has, reparations, then we now know that it can happen on a federal level. So I think it definitely sets the tone for what's to come. Derek, Native Americans, Japanese, and the Jewish community have all received reparations, as our panelists have mentioned. So do you think that they should have never received those reparations?
I don't think. Well, I didn't get a chance. You asked the last question based on something I brought up earlier. So I want to address that real quickly, because I agree with the federal panelists that if this were to happen, it needs to happen at the federal level. I don't think politically it's possible, and here's why. There are no representatives in Congress. If they're trying this at the municipal level, that's a different conversation. At the federal level, there are no representatives in Congress who only have Black constituents, right? All of them have white constituents. Most of them have majority white constituents, which is consistent with the makeup of the country. If they vote for a reparations bill, they have to explain to their constituents why I voted to give away some of your hard-earned money to other people simply because of the color of their skin. And they're not going to be able to explain that. Anybody who wants to see the Democrat Party permanently damaged for at least a decade or more should want the Democrats to force through reparations, because they will get hammered at the polls and not win another election for at least a decade if they ever actually did that.
The Democrats absolutely should force reparations. And here's
whether they should or not is a different question.
Black people are the largest group that vote 9 times out of 10 for Democrats in every election.
That's right.
There are plenty Democratic districts where they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Black people.
That's right.
Now, I'm tired of people telling Black people to just wait. We have waited for centuries. And now we're looking at, like Jakori brought up earlier, we're looking at the possibility of 2053 not having any wealth at all. I want us to take a look at our cities, because I don't think that Black people are disposable in this country. We have cities full of Black homelessness, of descendants of enslaved Africans in this country, particularly.
That's true. And who runs every single one of those cities? Who runs every single one of them?
I agree with you there. Listen, I am one of the hardest people you'll find when it comes to holding Democrats accountable. They absolutely need to be held accountable.
That's right.
You hold them accountable at the ballot
over and over again to vote for them. Biden would not be president right now if it were not for Black people. Let's just be honest about this. So they absolutely should force reparations through, because guess what? We have precedent where they paid Native Americans, where they paid the Jewish community, where they paid Japanese. And did the white people find that to be okay? Did they?
But here's the point you're missing.
To be paying reparations to the Japanese, Native Americans, and the Jewish community.
We got it.
Hold that thought, Zakia.
Here's the point you're missing. You're exactly right. What the Democrats should do and what they will do are two completely different things, for the reason you just pointed out. We vote for the Democrats to the tune of 90% plus, whether they deliver anything or not. So they have no motive to deliver on reparations or anything else, because we are only going to vote for them every single time, just like we have for the last 60 years, and they know it.
I would say
Jacory?
80 years, Derek.
Let me grab Jacory real quick. Jacory?
Well, that's where accountability comes into play. For some reason, we think we're not supposed to be engaged in politics other than voting. What is happening in between that vote for us to organize masses, the same exact organized masses that abolished Jim Crow, that abolished slavery, to influence politics, to influence Democrats, Republicans, anyone in between. We switched parties before, and we without a doubt can switch parties again. But at this point in time, we are so parked at the Democratic Party. Now we have to ask ourselves, where should our energy be applied? In moving to another party, or making sure the party that we hand our votes away to are being held accountable? We gave away our votes to Joe Biden. He did not commit to reparations. And I strongly believe that if we continue to do that and we continue to ignorantly participate in politics, we will never get our reparations. Every Black person across this country and our allies have to stand up for that. And we have to make sure that politicians care more about satisfying Black voters instead of dissatisfying white voters, especially when they have no basis to believe.
That's right.
That's a good one.
That's
Satisfying
right.
Black voters as opposed to dissatisfying white voters. You said a word there, my brother Jacory. Listen, to Zacchaeus' point, Dr. Martin Luther King said it best when he said, wait has almost always meant never. So as long as we wait, listen, the more likely it will never happen. So we do need coalitions and task force all across the nation so that it could happen if that's in fact what's owed to Black Americans. We're going to take a quick break, come right back on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. Please welcome back to the show, Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack, the co-founder of Ed Anime Productions and professor of engineering at Morgan State University, Dr. Ma'at, Louisville councilman and professor at Simmons College of Kentucky, Jacory Arthur, the host of Real Talk with ZSJ, Zakia Sankara, and the host of Uncle Tom Talks podcast, Derek Wilburn, is here to talk about the business of being Black. Listen, if there's ever any business in being Black, it would be reparations for sure, right? So how much money would an ideal package of reparations contain? How much money? And is it literally possible that America could pay that amount if due? Let's go with you, Dr. Ma'at.
I had a feeling, Tammi, you would come to me. And so in this book right here, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, is a book written by Dr. William Darity and Kirsten Mullen. Okay, so in this book, they talk about, reparations, and they said that a baseline for any reparations program should be 10 to 12 trillion dollars. And Jacory, he said earlier that when he did his calculations, and I don't know, Jacory, whether that was your calculations or if you got that from somewhere, you said they were looking at around $22 trillion. Well, Dr. Darity and Ms. Mullen said that the baseline should be anywhere between $10 million and $12 million. And yes, America has it. America could pull out some money when we went through this pandemic, and they did it like this. So yes, America can do it. But as Jacory articulated earlier, it would have to be done over time.
Derek, how much money would it cost? I guess you would say nothing, right?
No, well, and therein lies, I mentioned the devil in the details. So there are a number of reasons why calculating that number is nearly impossible. I've got a dozen, but I'll give you just a few. What do we do about Blacks who immigrated to this country post-emancipation? People like Ilhan Omar, who
well, they're not entitled to it.
Black. I believe it's my turn. Ilhan Omar clearly is of African descent. She came from Somalia, but she didn't come till 2012. Same question with whites who came here post-emancipation. What do we do with mulattoes? What do we do with people who have a parent of mixed race? So particularly those mulattoes where their demonstrably parent on the African-American side was a slave, and demonstrably the parent on the Caucasian side was a slave owner. Do they both give and get? How does that work? There's all kinds of issues surrounding this that's going to make sorting out who pays who how much nearly impossible to do.
Ja'Cory?
They figured it out before.
Brother
Exactly.
Derek mentioned how America is the greatest country in history, and I might agree with him. So I would say to that point, if Germany can figure out how to pay Jewish people reparations all over the world, surely America can figure that out when we largely still live in the South or in the former Confederacy. I'll also be clear as a member of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation that we believe reparations happens in phases. And if we're talking about a phase that includes independence from 1776 up until the Civil War in 1865, then we're talking about a period of time that the people you mentioned would not get access to that injustice being paid over time. We also have to keep in mind that Black immigrants before 1965, the Immigration Act, were less than 1% of the population. And according to Pew Research, over half of them, closer to 58% of them, did not get here until the year 2000. So obviously they would not be entitled to something that is being paid to the heirs of descendants of an injustice that occurred over a century ago, just to make that clear. And I'm not sure where Dr. Darity received his number.
I think there is oftentimes almost an anger feeling that every Black person in America or every person who identifies as Black is going to get a big paycheck. And I think that's what frustrates people the most when it comes to talk about reparations and the slave trade in America. But I'm glad you cleared that up, Ja'Cory, because it will not be every Black person who gets a piece of the pie, the proverbial pie.
And Ja'Cory raises another really good point. Ja'Cory raises another very, very good point, and that's this. Where's the statute of limitations? Or is there one? So both of my parents are the descendants of slaves. They're both still living. I have one sister. We're both descendants of slaves. Therefore, my children are the descendants of slaves. Therefore, my children's children will be descendants of slaves when they get here, and so on and so forth. So how do we figure that component out? Does America continue to pay all descendants of slaves reparations in perpetuity? We can't afford that. We're already $20 trillion in debt.
No, we can afford what we want to afford. America found trillions of dollars during this pandemic. And we have been told over and over again, oh, well, you know, we don't have it. Oh, it's going to break the bank. No, America, when it's time to go to war, they find the money. We can go to we are getting ready to go to war now with Russia and all these other people. They can find the money when it's time for them to do what they want to do. We are not accepting no. They figured it out for the Jewish Americans. They figured it out for the Japanese Americans, and they figured it out for Native Americans. We're going to figure it out for Black Americans as well. And I want to say, because I don't want to see a divide between Black people on this issue, African immigrants, by and large, support reparations for us. They support it. They are actually allies with us in this fight. So I just want to be clear about that as well. And they're not the ones that are working with us. They're not expecting a check. They support us getting our due and being made whole. African descendants of enslaved Africans in this country will be made whole and need to be made whole in this country.
Okay, so all descendants of all slaves in America should forever receive reparation pay from now until the end of the week.
Derek.
So what's the statute of limitations? When does it stop?
There is no statute of limitations until we're made whole. Period.
Okay, so we should all be paid forever.
No, I think Derek, hold that thought, everyone. Hold that thought. I think where the breakdown is coming is Derek is asking, should we be paid forever? Should his children be paid? Should his children's children be paid? Should his children's children's children be paid? And I don't believe that that is what our panelists are saying here. They're saying when they hear you say statute of limitations, what they're saying is until we're made whole. So if we don't have reparations by the time your children's children's children exist, then yes, they should too be paid reparations. But if we are paid reparations in this day and age, then you've been paid reparations. So you don't continue to get a check going forward, if that answers your question. Ja'Cory, did I get that right?
Absolutely. And the 20.9 trillion estimate comes from Professor Thomas Kramer at the University of Connecticut. I would say we should all challenge ourselves to think higher instead of lower. The Dr. Sandy Darity estimate would not close the gap over time. It would not sustain that wealth gap being closed. It might close it temporarily, but we close reparations, or we stop in terms of the statute of limitations once we sustain the wealth gap being closed. That could mean a decade after the initial payments start. It could mean a couple decades, but keep in mind, it takes much longer. Yvette Carnell, founder of ADOS, says this: it takes much longer to heal the wound than it does to inflict the damage. So if we're talking about damages that have accrued over the course of centuries, we could be talking about damages that have to be healed over the course of centuries. So for us to sit here and have the discussion, I think is inappropriate, because this payment will have to last for a very long time, because slavery lasted for 2.5 centuries and so forth with Jim Crow and other atrocities.
Absolutely. And Jacory, I want to be clear that he used the word baseline. He said any reparations program, the baseline should be anywhere from 10 to $12 trillion.
Why is it that reparations has such an effect on people? Why, Derek, why is it that people feel like, no, Black people should not get a check?
I think it's the basic human initiative that says, I should get what I earn, not what you owe me or what you owed my ancestors. The whole idea that we should get paid for suffering of other people goes against the grain, I think, of mainstream thinking, that something that occurred 150, 200 years ago, or even 50 years ago, me paying you for the sufferings of people from 200 years ago is inherently unjust. And that's what I think people, the way they view, the lens through which they view the topic.
So do you feel as if, hold that thought, do you feel as if other groups of people should not have gotten reparations too? We'll let him answer that question when we return on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. And Derek, I left with asking you a question. Do you believe that Native Americans, that Japanese, and that the Jewish community deserved reparations or should have received reparations?
I think the idea that I should pay you for something my ancestors did is fundamentally flawed. But those people groups are different than Black Americans, because you have whites in America who fought on the Union side of the conflict. You have families alive today who lost family members, who have family members that lost limbs, trying to end slavery in this country. So how do you segregate them out and say, okay, you're exempted from funding reparations because your family's paid enough already? There's
respectfully, you did not answer the question, brother.
Here to try to sort out to make that true.
Well, what's interesting is I like how we sort of kind of pretend that the Civil War was about ending slavery, when really the Civil War was about ending slavery so that there could be more people to fight on the other side. Technically, it wasn't because Abraham Lincoln wanted the slaves free. Let's just be honest about that. Am I off base here, Dr. Mott?
Tammi, you're right in line. Derek, excuse me. So Tammi, you were right in line. And I think a good book for folks to read is, Forced into Glory by Dr. Lerone Bennett, that talks about that. I mean, Abraham Lincoln didn't just say, oh, I'm going to free, enslaved people because I'm just this benevolent president. And it wasn't about that at all. So thank you, Tammi, for bringing that up.
Go ahead, Derek. Go ahead, Derek.
I'm not talking about Abraham Lincoln or his motives. I'm talking about the families who lost life and limb in the war itself. So the discussion over the motive of the war and the outcome of the war need to be separated. The outcome of the war was the abolishment of slavery and the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. Millions of families and hundreds of thousands of white men gave their lives for us to get there in 1863. Whether or not that was Lincoln's motivation or not has nothing to do with it. So there are families who we're going to say, you need to pay reparations after the price their families have already paid a century and a half or two ago.
Respectfully, you did not answer the question when she asked you, should the other groups, and I think you didn't answer the question because you already know whatever your career is will be over if you said that Jewish Americans did not deserve.
That's where you're wrong. I answered the question.
Okay, so let's just be real clear about that. You did not answer the question
I most certainly did.
So if you can empathize with white people who fought on the side of the Union, we can certainly empathize with our ancestors who were enslaved and deserve to have their descendants to be made whole in this country. And the other piece is that it's not just enslavement.
I answered the question
we're talking about We're talking about peonage. We're talking about vagrancy. We're talking about sharecropping. We're talking about legal incarceration, which is new slavery, if we want to really talk about it. Thank you. Okay, so let's just be real clear that we live in a country that is extremely anti-Black and racist. And so the reason why you have people on the other side, or white people in general, who are okay with paying Japanese Americans, Jewish Americans, and others, is because they're okay with that. But for some reason, when Black people say, well, you know, we've had the boot on our necks our entire lives in this country, where is justice for us? We still have political prisoners in this country who simply wanted to create acupuncture clinics. Shout out to Matula Shakur and others. We still have people who are being incarcerated and should be let out. Period.
That's right. Political prisoners. That's
so
right.
Derek, you fundamentally believe that none of those other groups deserved reparations.
I don't know why she said I didn't answer that question. I did answer that question. I said no.
Wow.
And the idea that I have Jewish supporters that I don't want to upset by saying that is absolutely ludicrous and a personal attack that makes no sense in this context whatsoever. So I don't know where that even comes from.
Okay. Jacory, are there disadvantages to reparations, Jacory?
Well, I would have to ask the question, are there disadvantages to us being overwhelmingly represented in the numbers of homeless families? Over half of the homeless families are us. Over half of the incarcerations are us. The no-knock warrants being served, the police violence that is being served. Those are the disadvantages. And if we don't address that through having an economic base, through having wealth, we'll continue to suffer with that. Earlier,
well, I have to ask this because Derek says, why do we always have to go backwards? And we have today. So what does the no-knock warrants, what do everything you just mentioned, what does that have to do with slave trade?
Well, once you inherit the debt that is owed to you from your ancestors who suffered through the slave trade, you don't have to worry about sleeping on the streets because you can afford housing. You can afford to make sure you're living a life that in no way, shape, or form forces you to live into a life of crime, of desperation, because you're in poverty that would result in no-knock warrants being served to your address. This is all economic. And as long as we ignore that, we'll get caught up in the reparations conversation and not have a logical discussion around what the solutions are. The solution is making sure that we have wealth and we have everything that we need. The choices that people make are the choices that people have. And we have been robbed of opportunity and choices for as long as we have existed in this country. Everyone else has gotten their due. And if they continue to fight to try and get their due, Brother Derek mentioned other folks and other populations that might want to acquire something. They can fight for that. That's not my fight. I would argue that's not his fight. That's not anyone's fight on this call. We have to fight for our own and take care of our own before we worry about whoever's across the street or in some cases across this country.
I've always wondered because I kind of feel Derek's position when he says, why should we get paid now? So, and how does slavery interfere with generational wealth of today? So here's where I'm going. Get ready because I'm about to roll on you, okay? Just because you get a reparations check does not mean that generational wealth shall presume. I can get a reparations check and I can go to the Gucci store. I can go buy me some Yeezys. I mean, there's so much that I could do that has absolutely nothing to do with creating generational wealth. So how does having that check support giving us what we never received in the first place?
I don't think that reparations, number one, is just about a check.
But I'm talking just about a check.
Well,
how does giving a person a check solidify and totally waive?
It doesn't, simply if that's what you're going to stop at, but
exactly.
That's not reparations to me.
Exactly. Like it's more than a check, Tammy. So I know you want to stop with just a check.
Well,
okay.
and I say that because when we speak reparations, we are talking financial. We are talking about a check more than anything else. I know that there are other things that can be put into positioning. I, for one, am all for waiving school loans when it comes to reparations. Also, waiving taxes for Black people when it comes to reparations.
Land.
But still,
Land.
I'm talking about, absolutely land. But Jacory mentioned things like no-knock warrants and police brutality. Just because you get reparations does not mean those things will not happen. It doesn't mean that America now sees Black people in a different way.
Well, you have to read between the lines of the connections that impact our social determinants of health. And that includes economic stability. It includes access to housing, access to education, healthcare, all of which costs money. And if you do not have money, you do not have access to an American life. We can even talk as far as the gig economy that President Barack Obama really exacerbated, where people don't have jobs, they have parts of jobs. Once you have stability within your household because you have wealth, because you have money, everything after that really becomes more accessible. Your life expectancy is going to be expanded because you have access to those social determinants of health. You really just have to connect the dots. It's easy to understand how our areas are over-policed because we disproportionately are unemployed, are living in poverty, and so forth. All of this is connected.
But I'm still going to get stopped by the cop and followed in the store.
Well, that's anecdotal. And I think when we have those anecdotal arguments, you can say it about anything. You mentioned going to the Gucci store or buying Jordans. I've seen no evidence. In fact, I've seen the opposite evidence to point that we spend our money overwhelmingly on the needs that we have.
That's right.
Once we're in a position to spend our money on those needs and beyond that, flourish and do what we aspire to do in this country, which we've been able to accomplish even without wealth, from the inventions, from the moves in politics and the culture that we created.
We're going to take a quick commercial break, come right back on Business of Being Black. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. I'm Tammi Mack, and the business of being Black today is reparations. Please welcome. We have Dr. Ma'at is here with us today. Jacory Arthur is here with us today. Zakiya Sankara Jabbar, and of course, Derek Wilburn is with us. Jacory, you were making a point before we went to break. I want you to complete that thought for us.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that because we've been in this country for centuries and had really no wealth at all, or a minuscule amount of wealth that is anchored in pensions and disproportionate liabilities, we have to understand that there need to be protections in addition to the reparations that are distributed to us. Those protections will protect us from exploitation. They will protect us from this capitalistic system. And we have to hold on to that wealth so that it can last and be multi-generational. It won't be given in some sort of lump sum up front. We have to make sure this is paid over time for our children and our children's children and so forth.
Sort of like a trust fund.
In some cases, absolutely, that might be it. But if we're talking about our elders who are getting close to the end of life, I wouldn't necessarily say their wealth needs to be put into a trust fund. They need to go ahead and spend that because they never had it before, and they need to reap the benefits of their fruits.
Something that you said,
we're going to trust the government to administer this fund. I'd like to read a quote, if I may, real quickly by the great Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest thinkers in American history. Quote, "Everybody has asked the question, what shall we do with the Negro? I've had but one answer from the beginning: do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Do nothing with us. If the apple were not remain on the tree of their own strength, if they are worm-eaten, if they are early ripe and disposed to fall, I say, let them fall. I'm not for tying them to the tree in any way except by nature's plan. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him fall also. All I ask is give him the chance to stand on his own legs, but let him alone." Close quote. My point of that is this, the panel. At some point, we have to stop looking to the government as source and provider. Accepting this endless string of handouts from government has never worked, is not working, will never work.
Did you feel the same way about
hold that thought, Zakiya?
They were sending for?
Did you complete your thought, Derek?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I would like to quote a very prolific person myself. His name is Tupac Shakur. He said, "We have money for wars, but can't feed the poor." Zakiya,
Yeah, I just wanted to respond quickly to Derek when he said dependent on the government. I was wondering, if he meant that also for the corporations who receive billions of dollars in support from the government during the COVID-19 pandemic. Are we consistent with that? I just want to be clear. Is it just Black people shouldn't depend on the government, or who? I'm just trying to get an understanding. And then finally, I'll say where there may be some agreement is that I do believe that Black people need to have a clear say in how reparations will be distributed, and that we need to be clear that there should be nothing attached to it. It should not be digital only, as we are moving into a hyper technical economy with digital wallets and central bank digital currencies. People need to understand that we're moving very fast into a more digital age. And we need to be very cognizant of that. There are certainly policy briefs out there that predict that by 2033 that we'll be an entirely cashless society. I believe that will disproportionately impact Black people, and that if we have central banks that have complete control over our money, then that will be certainly some issue that I believe that we should be concerned about. So perhaps Derek may agree with that. So I just want to make sure that we have a say in terms of how reparations will be given out to African descendant people.
Well, we'll definitely have a say, because, leave it up to anybody else, we won't even have reparations. So I'm sure Black folk gonna be all up in that conversation, as they are right now. My girl Friday Jones in California, head of the task force on reparations. So definitely you don't want to give reparations and then not have the people who are due it discuss how it will be dispersed, and et cetera, et cetera. Ja'Cory, you made a very interesting point, I would say fact. I did not know that African Americans disproportionately spent their money on needs.
Absolutely. And I think when we make comments around reparations, even I think to the Dave Chappelle skit where he made fun of us and made it seem like our reparations would just be spent on anything and everything that is unnecessary, it really creates this poison pill for our work and the momentum that we have to actually get this reparations, reparative justice distributed. It's important to realize that no one else, to my understanding, there's no evidence to point to anyone else, from the Shoshones to the Pueblo Indians, to even the slave owners who got reparations whenever Abraham Lincoln distributed money to them. No one else was ever had any sort of concern around what they would spend that money on. But for some reason, we look at ourselves as second, third, fourth, fifth class citizens.
Corey, I want to get to your advocacy foundation. Please tell us about it.
Absolutely. The ADOS Advocacy Foundation birthed from the founders, Antonio Moore, Yvette Carnell. We are continuing the mission of Dr. Martin Luther King, the mission of getting reparative justice. And I think King might have said famously, I have a dream, but at the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, it's important for us to realize that I have a team. We cannot move forward with reparations or any other transformative Black agenda or policy if we as a people do not organize ourselves. We're not undeserving, we're not unworthy, we are simply unorganized. So the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, we are looking to build our membership across this country so we can bring that dream into fruition.
Dr. Ma'at, Anime Productions.
Yes.
Continuity.
I wanted to lead in with that Black people are the only group of people who are expected in this country to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, but we've been given boots with no straps. So anyway, Anime Production is a family-owned and operated business that creates educational programs for children. We have a program called Meltrek, which teaches children about the history, culture, and achievements of Black people from a Black perspective. And you can go to edanimeproductions.com to get Meltrek for your child. We also offer a program called Conscious Ingenuity that uses STEAM to build character, confidence, and capabilities. We're in several schools across Baltimore City, and we're getting ready to offer a virtual version of the
Let me get to Zakia. Zakia, please tell us about Real Talk with ZSJ.
That's right. Real Talk with ZSJ is a Pan-African Black media outlet hosted on YouTube and Rumble. So I invite listeners here to check me out on Rumble and YouTube, where we talk about Pan-Africanism. We talk about liberation of African people globally. Thank you.
Derek, you know I need the people to know about Uncle Tom.
Well, let's talk about my internship program. It's more interesting.
I do appreciate your internship program.
POCCinterns.com. We take Black Americans, college students, many from our HBCUs, send them to Washington, D.C. to work in paid internships in the halls of Congress. We Blacks are only about 13% of the national population, but only about 2% of the population on Capitol Hill. That's bad. To get equal representation, we've got to get young people interested in our legislative process, and we take liberals and conservatives alike and pay them to do just that.
I love it. Love every piece of it. Derek, Zakia, Jacory, and Dr. Ma'at, thank you so much for being on the show. Your conversation is always welcomed, and certainly your debate. That is The Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. Up next, it's Claudia Jordan and her cast and crew with the T, the G, the I, and the F. That's all on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack.